By midnight, she had been to 7 different stores. By 2 in the morning, she had spent more than $54,000, and the man on the phone was still talking. Helen Carmody owed nothing. No back taxes, no penalties, no warrant. There was no case. There was no agent. There was no investigation. But she didn't know that yet. The voice on the phone said his name was Agent Daniel Pruitt. He said he was calling from the IRS. He said there was a warrant out for her arrest, and that the only way to stop it was to pay, that night, before the courts opened in the morning, in full. She was 71 years old, a retired school librarian, a widow who had never once been late on a tax payment in her life. And over the next 9 hours, following the careful, patient instructions of a man she had never met and would never meet, she would empty her checking account, drain her savings, break a certificate of deposit early, take a cash advance she did not fully understand, and convert all of it into gift cards. Then she read the numbers off the back of each card, one by one, into the phone. $54,200, gone before sunrise. The most disturbing part is not that she did it. It is that, near the end, exhausted, standing in a parking lot under a buzzing light, she started to cry, and she apologized to him. She apologized for being slow. How does a careful, intelligent woman lose nearly everything she has in a single night to a stranger who never showed his face? This is how it happened. And by the end, you will understand exactly why it could happen to almost anyone you love. Helen Carmody had spent 33 years as a librarian at an elementary school in Cedar Hollow, a quiet, tree-lined suburb on the edge of a mid-sized Midwestern city. For more than 3 decades, she was the woman who taught small children how to whisper, how to handle a book gently, how to look something up when they didn't know the answer. She was orderly. She was patient. She kept the late fee ledger by hand long after the school switched to a computer system because she didn't fully trust the computer to be fair. She was, by every account, from the people who knew her, careful. Careful with words. Careful with money. Careful with rules. She married Raymond Carmody in her 20s. He was a maintenance supervisor for the county, a steady man who fixed what broke and saved what he could. They were never wealthy. They raised 2 children, a daughter named Diane and a son named Mark, on 2 modest public salaries in a small brick house they paid off slowly over 29 years. They took 1 real vacation a decade. They clipped coupons without irony, and across all those years, dollar by dollar, they built a small, ordinary nest egg, the kind that does not make anyone rich but is supposed to be enough. When Raymond died of a heart attack 3 years before this story begins, Helen was left alone in the brick house with the paid-off mortgage and that small, careful savings. Her children had moved away, Diane a few hours north, Mark across the country. She kept the house spotless. She volunteered at the library twice a week. She called her grandchildren on Sundays. She had 2 fears, the people who loved her would later say. She was afraid of being a burden, and she was afraid of getting in trouble. The deep, almost childlike fear of a rule follower. The dread of being told she had done something wrong with the government, with taxes, with anything official. Those 2 fears were not weaknesses. For 71 years, they had made her dependable. They were about to be turned into weapons. Remember that. The very things that made Helen trustworthy were the things that made her a target. It started with nothing unusual at all. It started with a ringing phone. It was a Tuesday in March. Helen had filed her tax return by mail a few weeks earlier, the way she always did, the way she had done every spring for 50 years. She did not e-file. She did not trust it. She printed the forms, double-checked the math twice, signed them in blue ink, and mailed them with a stamp. As far as she was concerned, taxes were a sacred, slightly frightening ritual you completed precisely and then tried not to think about. So, when her landline rang that afternoon, and the caller identified himself as being from the IRS, it did not arrive in a vacuum. It landed in a mind that had been thinking about taxes for weeks. It fit. The timing fit. That is not a coincidence. According to consumer fraud investigators, this kind of call is deliberately seasonal. It comes in the spring, when ordinary people are filing, worrying, and primed to believe a tax agency might be calling them. She picked up the phone. That was the entire mistake. That was the whole of her error. She answered a call, on a number she could see, from a name she recognized. During the exact season she expected the IRS to be on her mind. Ask yourself honestly, if your phone rang during tax season, and the screen said the call was from a tax agency, and a calm, official voice said your name and your address correctly, would you hang up? Most people wouldn't. Most people would do exactly what Helen did. They would listen. The man's voice was calm. That was the first thing she noticed. Calm, professional, almost bored. The way a real official sounds when they have done this 1,000 times. He said his name was Agent Daniel Pruitt. He gave a badge number, a long string of digits she would later be unable to remember exactly, except that he repeated it twice and told her to write it down. He told her she could call him back at the number on her screen to verify. The number on her screen began with a Washington, D.C. area code. Here is the first thing you need to understand, because it is the foundation of the entire crime. The number on her screen was a lie. The name was a lie. The badge was a lie. Caller ID can be made to display anything at all. Any name, any number, any agency. The screen on your phone is not proof of who is calling. It is a label the caller chooses. Helen did not know that. Most people her age did not know that. A great many people of every age still don't. Agent Pruitt told her there was a serious problem with her tax filings going back several years. He said an audit had uncovered an error, that she had underpaid, and that the underpayment had been flagged as possible tax fraud. He used that word carefully. Fraud. He let it sit there. He told her the matter had been referred for enforcement, and that a warrant for her arrest had been issued that morning. To Helen Carmody, who had spent her entire life terrified of doing something wrong with the government, those words did something physical. Her chest tightened. Her hands went cold. The rule follower's deepest nightmare had just been spoken aloud in a calm, official voice. He told her not to panic. He told her there was still a way to fix it, but only if she acted immediately, and only if she did exactly as he said. This is the moment the trap closed. Not with force, with fear, and then with relief. He created the terror. And then, in the same breath, he offered himself as the only person who could make it stop. Investigators have a name for this. They call it the threat and rescue pattern. The same voice that frightens you is the voice that saves you, so you cling to it. You stop seeing him as the danger. You start seeing him as your only friend. He said the amount she owed, with penalties and interest, came to $9,800. He said that because the warrant was already active, she could not simply mail a check or pay online because the courts had frozen her normal payment access pending the fraud review. He said the only way to halt the arrest before morning was through what he called a federal payment voucher. A federal payment voucher. It sounded official. It sounded like something that might exist. It does not exist. There is no such thing. He told her to go to a store. Any store, and purchase gift cards in specific denominations, and then to call him back and read him the numbers on the back. He said the IRS used this system in emergency enforcement cases because it allowed for instant verification of payment. He said it was routine. It is not routine. It is the opposite of routine. And here is the single most important sentence in this entire story. The one sentence that would have saved Helen Carmody $54,000 and 3 years of shame. No government agency on earth will ever ask you to pay a tax bill, a fine, a fee, or a warrant with gift cards. Not the IRS, not any tax authority, not the police, not a court. Never. The moment anyone official asks for gift cards, the call is a crime in progress. There are no exceptions. There is no scenario. It is always, every single time, a scam. But Helen had never heard that sentence. No one had ever told her. So she got in her car. The first store was a pharmacy 2 miles from her house. Following his instructions, still on the phone, she bought $2,000 in gift cards. The cashier, according to what Helen later told her daughter, glanced at her. A 71-year-old woman buying $2,000 in gift cards on a Tuesday afternoon, and asked, mildly, what they were for. Agent Pruitt had already coached her on this. He had told her, gently, that bank and store employees sometimes interfered with federal matters out of ignorance, and that if anyone asked, she should simply say the cards were gifts for her grandchildren. So that is what she said. Gifts for the grandkids. The cashier nodded and rang it up. She went back to her car. She read the numbers off the cards into the phone, slowly, carefully, the way she did everything. And Agent Pruitt thanked her. He told her she was doing great. He told her the first portion of the warrant had been lifted. She felt, for one moment, a wave of relief so strong it almost made her dizzy. That relief was the most dangerous thing that happened to her all day. Because relief is what made her trust him. Relief is what told her brain, this is working. This man is helping me. Keep going. The wrongness was already there. A real agency does not send you to a pharmacy. A warrant does not get lifted one gift card at a time. But the relief drowned the wrongness out. He told her there was a complication. If this is already making your skin crawl, you should know it gets much worse, and it gets worse fast. Hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends and how the people who did it came back a second time. Now, back to that parking lot. The complication, Agent Pruitt explained, was that the payment system had only partially registered. He said the freeze on her accounts had caused the transaction to flag, and that the fraud division now wanted additional verification before they would close the warrant. He said the remaining balance, plus a new federal processing penalty, came to $4,500 more. She drove to a second store, a big box retailer this time. She bought the cards. She read the numbers. He thanked her again, and again. The warrant was almost lifted. Almost. This is the pattern. This is the engine of the entire scam. There is always one more step. The finish line is always visible, always close, always just one more payment away. It is never reached because it was never meant to be reached. The goal is not to collect a specific amount. The goal is to keep her on the phone and keep her moving until there is nothing left to take. By now, she had been on the call for over 4 hours. He never let her hang up. That was deliberate too. He told her that disconnecting would re-trigger the warrant and that officers were standing by. So she kept the phone pressed to her ear in store after store, parking lot after parking lot, isolated inside a single unbroken conversation with the one man she believed could save her. She could not call her daughter. She could not call her bank. She could not call anyone, because hanging up, he told her, meant handcuffs. Isolation is the scammer's most important tool. As long as Helen stayed on that phone, no one else could speak to her. No clerk, no banker, no daughter, no friend, no rational outside voice could break the spell, because the spell required that his be the only voice she heard. Then the call changed hands. Agent Pruitt told her the case was being escalated to enforcement and that she would now be speaking with a federal officer. A new voice came on the line. harder, colder. He said he was Lieutenant Hargrove of the Federal Tax Enforcement Unit, and where Pruitt had been calm, Hargrove was severe. He told her the Fraud Division had now reviewed her file and determined that the amount she owed had been understated. The true figure, with the new penalties for what he called obstruction, was far higher. This is a tactic too. The second voice, the good agent, and the harsh officer. It made the operation feel large and real and inescapable, an entire institution closing in on one frightened woman in a parking lot. And it raised the stakes, because now there was a person who sounded angry, who sounded like he wanted to arrest her, and only one fragile thread, her compliance, holding him back. Lieutenant Hargrove told her she would need to demonstrate her ability to pay the full amount that night, or the warrant would be executed at her home in the morning. He walked her, store by store, through the rest of her financial life. She had $6,400 in checking. She bought cards until it was empty. She had $21,300 in savings. He instructed her to move it and spend it down. She had a certificate of deposit, $18,500, money Raymond had set aside, the closest thing they had to an untouchable account. Hargrove told her the federal hold would penalize her far worse than any early withdrawal fee. She broke it. And when that still was not enough to satisfy the ever-growing number, he walked her through taking an $8,000 cash advance on a credit card, a transaction she did not understand and would not have known how to do without his patient, step-by-step instructions in her ear. $6,400, $21,300, $18,500, $8,000, one night, one phone call. One woman going from store to store to store because each store limited how many cards she could buy at once, so she had to keep driving, keep finding new registers, keep her voice steady at the counter, while a stranger listened in her ear. By 2 a.m, the total was $54,200. That was the moment, near the very end, standing under the fluorescent light of the 7th store's parking lot, that Helen Carmody began to cry. She was exhausted. She was frightened. Her hands were shaking too hard to read the small numbers on the cards. And so she apologized. She apologized to the man who was robbing her for being slow. Then the phone went quiet. And then it went dead. She drove home in the dark with a glove box full of useless plastic cards and called the number back. It rang and rang. No one answered. She called again. Nothing. She told herself the warrant was lifted, that it was over, that she had fixed it. She made herself a cup of tea at 3 a.m. and sat at her kitchen table and tried to believe that. She did not tell anyone. The shame, even then, before she fully understood, was already enormous. It was her daughter who found out. 2 days later, Diane called for their usual chat, and her mother sounded off, tired, vague. When Diane asked if everything was all right, Helen said yes, of course, the way she always did. But something in her voice didn't sit right. Diane asked about the house, the bills, ordinary things. And then, almost casually, she mentioned she'd seen a charge alert because she shared a banking app notification with her mother that she'd set up the year before, just to keep an eye on things. A cash advance, $8,000. There was a silence on the line. And then Helen Carmody, 71 years old, started to cry, and the whole thing came out. Diane got in her car that night and drove the 3 hours south. She sat at the same kitchen table where her mother had drunk that cup of tea at 3 a.m, and she added it up by hand on a legal pad, the way her mother would have. Checking, savings, the certificate of deposit her father had built, the cash advance, the pharmacy, the big box store, the 7 different registers. $54,200. Her mother's careful, decades-long, dollar-by-dollar life savings. Nearly all of it gone in 9 hours. And that was the moment the second nightmare began, because now they had to try to get it back, and they were about to learn how the system actually treats a woman like Helen Carmody. They started with the bank. Diane was certain, the way most of us would be certain, that this was fraud, and that fraud gets reversed. Someone stole from her mother. The bank would fix it. That is what banks do. That is not what happened. The bank was sympathetic. The bank was kind. And the bank explained patiently why there was almost nothing it could do. Because here is the cruel genius of the gift card scam, and you need to understand it clearly. When your card number is stolen by a hacker, the bank can reverse the charge because the transaction was unauthorized. But Helen had authorized every single purchase. She walked into the stores. She bought the cards with her own money, willingly, with her own hand. From the bank's records, these were not fraudulent transactions at all. They were a woman buying gift cards. Legitimate purchases. There was nothing to dispute, because on paper, she had done it all on purpose. The money had not been stolen by breaking in. It had been handed over at the door. Then they tried the gift card companies. Diane called every one of them, card brand by card brand, reading off the numbers from the cards still sitting in the glove box. The answer was the same each time. Every balance had already been drained. Within minutes of Helen reading the numbers aloud, the money was gone the instant she spoke it. By the time she was crying in that parking lot at 2 a.m, the cards in her hand were already empty. This is why the criminals demand gift cards specifically, and you should burn this into your memory. A gift card is the perfect untraceable instrument. The moment the code is spoken, the value can be moved, resold, and laundered anywhere in the world, instantly, with no name attached and no way to claw it back. It is, for all practical purposes, like handing a stranger an envelope of cash through the phone. There is no account to freeze. There is no transfer to reverse. There is no one to sue. That is not a flaw the criminals exploit. That is the entire reason they choose it. They went to the police. The local department took the report, gently, and told them what local departments almost always have to tell these families. The call had been routed through spoofed numbers. The operation was almost certainly overseas, run out of a country with no extradition and no interest in helping. The money was already laundered. The officer who took the report was not unkind. He had simply seen it many times, and he knew the truth. There would most likely be no arrest, no investigation, no recovery. He suggested they file a report with the Federal Complaint Center for Internet and Financial Crime, which they did, dutifully, knowing even as they typed it that it was a number going into a very large pile. And so the Carmody family arrived at the place so many of these families arrive at. A crime had unquestionably been committed. Someone had stolen $54,000 from a 71-year-old widow. And every institution they turned to, the bank, the card companies, the police, the federal system, told them, in its own polite and procedural way, that there was nothing to be done. Helen had authorized it. The money was untraceable. The criminals were beyond reach. The system was not built to help her. It was, if anything, built in a way that protected everyone except her. The crime took her money in one night. The system took her hope over the following weeks. Before we go on, I need you to do something. If this story is turning your stomach, that is exactly the point. Please like this video, subscribe, and leave a comment, because it genuinely helps these warnings reach more people. And if you have a parent, a grandparent, or anyone older in your life, share this with them today, not next week, today. One conversation, one sentence, the government will never ask for gift cards, can stop this from happening to someone you love. I've also put together a free scam-proof checklist that lays out every single warning sign in this exact case, in plain language, on one page you can hand to someone. It's completely free. The link is in the description. Now, let me tell you what happened 5 weeks later, because the people who did this were not finished with Helen Carmody. For about a month, the family tried to move on. There was no other option. Diane helped her mother rebudget around the wreckage. Helen, who had never carried debt in her life, now had a credit card balance she could not pay. She stopped going to the library. She stopped calling her grandchildren on Sundays because she could not bear the brightness of their voices. The shame had settled over her like a heavy coat she could not take off. She told Diane, more than once, that she felt stupid. She was not stupid. She had been hunted by professionals, but shame does not listen to logic. And then, in the middle of April, the phone rang again. This time, the voice said he was calling from a Victim Asset Recovery Bureau. He was warm. He was reassuring. He said his name was Mr. Castellano, and he said he had good news. He said her case, the gift card fraud from March, had been flagged in a federal recovery initiative. He said investigators had successfully traced and frozen a portion of the funds taken from her, and that they were now in the process of returning money to verified victims. For Helen Carmody, after 5 weeks of shame and silence and the flat, hopeless answers from everyone official, this was the sun coming up. He knew details. He knew the date. He knew, roughly, the amount. He knew it had been gift cards. To Helen, that proved he was real. How could he know all that if he weren't part of the official investigation? Here is how. Because he was part of the same operation. Or he had bought her information from it. This is the second betrayal, and it is the one almost no one sees coming. In the world of these scams, the names of people who have already fallen victim are treasure. They are compiled, traded, and sold between criminal operations as what investigators bluntly call sucker lists. A person who has paid once is statistically far more likely to pay again, especially when offered the one thing they want most in the world, their money back. So a second crew calls, posing as the people who will fix the first crime, the recovery scam. It is not a different scam. It is the same scam, returning for the part it left behind. Mr. Castellano explained that to release her recovered funds, there was, unfortunately, a federal processing requirement. A tax, he called it, on the recovered amount, and a release fee, which had to be paid up front before the funds could be deposited. The amount came to $11,800. And Helen, who had nothing left, who had already lost everything, who wanted so desperately to undo what she had done, found the money. She took another cash advance. She borrowed quietly from her brother, telling him only that she had an unexpected bill, and she paid it, the same way she had paid the first time. Gift cards, numbers read aloud into a phone. She did not tell Diane. Of course she didn't. She wanted, more than anything, to fix it herself, to hand her daughter the recovered money and erase the shame. She wanted the story to have an ending she could survive. There was no recovered money. There never had been. The $11,800 vanished exactly as the $54,000 had. The same untraceable instrument, the same overseas drain, the same dead phone line afterward. They had robbed her once for $54,000. They came back and robbed her again for nearly $12,000 more. By the time it was over, Helen Carmody had lost more than $66,000 to people she never saw. And the cruelest part is the design of it. The first crime created the wound. The second crime was aimed directly at the wound. They knew she was ashamed. They knew she was desperate. They knew she wanted her money back so badly, she would risk what little she had left to get it. They engineered her hope and then sold it back to her. That is not opportunism. That is a business model. Diane found out the second time the way she found out the first. Another charge alert. Another silence on the phone. Another long drive south. And this time, when the truth came out at the kitchen table, her mother could barely speak. So Diane stopped relying on the institutions that had failed them, and she did the one thing left to do. She made it public. She contacted a consumer investigative reporter at a regional outlet, the kind of journalist who covers fraud against ordinary people. She handed over everything: the timeline, the dates, the figures, the recovery scam, the bank's response, the police report, the federal complaint number, and the story ran. A 71-year-old retired school librarian, a widow, a woman who had never been late on a tax payment in her life, robbed of more than $66,000 across 2 coordinated attacks by criminals who used her own carefulness and her own fear against her. The public reaction was loud, and some of it helped. After the story aired, the bank, under the spotlight, agreed to forgive the interest and fees on the cash advances Helen had taken. A few $1,000s of relief. It was something. It was real. The reporter's segment almost certainly warned thousands of other families away from the same trap, which is worth more than money. But notice what did not happen. The $54,000 did not come back. The $12,000 did not come back. There was no arrest. The men who called themselves Agent Pruitt and Lieutenant Hargrove and Mr. Castellano were never identified, never charged, never touched. The money was gone the night it was spoken into the phone, and it stayed gone. The publicity produced a small mercy from one bank and a warning for strangers. It did not produce justice, and it did not produce restitution. It almost never does. This is the hollow shape these stories take. The relief, when it comes at all, comes only after a family fights its way into the public eye. And even then, it is a fraction, a gesture, a forgiveness of fees, rather than a return of savings. The crime is fast. The recovery is slow, partial, and usually impossible. So here is where it lands. Helen Carmody sold the small brick house, the one she and Raymond paid off over 29 years, the one she had, kept spotless. She could not afford to stay, and she could not bear to. She moved in with Diane, 3 hours north, into a spare room. She is safe now. She is loved. Her daughter watches over her. But the careful life she built, dollar by dollar, across half a century, the savings meant to keep her from ever being a burden, the very thing she was most afraid of becoming, is gone. The fear that defined her whole life came true, not through any failing of her own, but because someone learned how to use it. She still does not answer the phone when she does not recognize the number. She flinches when it rings. The woman who taught hundreds of children how to look up the answer when they did not know it spent one night being lied to by a stranger, and it cost her everything. So let me give you the warning signs, plainly, the way Helen wishes someone had given them to her. Carry these, and give them to the people you love. 1. No government agency will ever ask you to pay with gift cards. Not the tax authority, not the police, not a court, not any agency. The moment gift cards are mentioned, the call is a scam. Hang up. 2. Real agencies do not threaten you with immediate arrest over the phone, and they do not demand payment that same night. Urgency and the threat of jail are pressure tactics designed to stop you from thinking and stop you from calling anyone. 3. The number on your screen proves nothing. Caller ID can display any name and any number. If a call frightens you, hang up and call the agency back yourself, using a number you look up independently. never a number the caller gives you. 4. Anyone who tells you to stay on the phone and not tell your family is isolating you. That instruction alone is proof of a crime. Hang up and call someone who loves you. And 5. If you have already lost money to a scam, be on guard for the second wave. Anyone who calls promising to recover your funds for an upfront fee is a thief returning for the rest. Real recovery does not work that way. The call that promises your money back is the call most likely to take what's left. There is one more thing about Helen's story that should stay with you long after the dollar figure fades. She was not careless. She was not foolish. She was careful, intelligent, and good. And that is precisely why it worked. They did not exploit a weakness in her. They exploited her decency, her respect for the rules, her fear of doing wrong. The better a person you are, the more these calls are designed to hurt you. So ask yourself this: the next time your phone rings and a calm, official voice says your name correctly and tells you there is a warrant and that the only way out is to act right now, alone, tonight, before you can call anyone, before you can think, in that moment, with your heart pounding and your hands going cold, would you remember that it's a lie? Or would you, like Helen, simply pick up the phone and start to listen? If this story moved you, subscribe to Real Scams Uncovered. A new case drops every week, and each one is a warning that might reach the right person at the right moment. Take the free scam-proof checklist in the description below. It's free, there's no catch, and it lays out these exact warning signs on a single page. Download it and share it with someone you love. It might be the most important thing you do today.